Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Barnet Scholars Program, which is generally supported by the Who am I kidding? I can't use these. They're supposed to make me look smart. It doesn't do it. Can't see anything. Generously supported by the Will Barnet Foundation. It is 20-point font, my notes. My name is Andrew Eschelbarker. I am the Deputy Director and Head of Art and Exhibitions here at the PMA, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's program. I'd first like to acknowledge that we are convening tonight's celebration in the Land of the Dawn, a region encompassing present-day Maine and the unceded homelands of the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and Abenaki nations. Together, these nations represent the Wabanaki Confederacy. They stewarded these lands and waters for thousands of years before the establishment of national borders and state lines, and continue to do so today. As we get started tonight, I want to thank the Barnet family and the Barnet Foundation for funding this program. Will Barnet was a prolific painter and printmaker, and for me, an extraordinarily moving artist. I love looking at his work where it's meditative, and there are these gorgeous domestic scenes where there's a juxtaposition of figures against planes of color, and he had such a nuanced way of filling the picture plane that was both so engaging in terms of falling into it, playing with that border of figuration and abstraction that is haunting, deep, thoughtful, and honestly just a pleasure to look at. Will Barnet, in addition to being an extraordinary painter, was a hugely influential teacher at the Art Students League, Yale, Cooper Union, and PAFA. And it's fitting, as part of thinking about his legacy, his family has continued to support endeavors like this that are opportunities for us to continue to learn. So thank you to the Barnet family and the Barnet Foundation. For the past 12 years, the Barnet Foundation has supported the PMA through the Barnet Scholars Program, allowing the museum to welcome established artists, scholars, and thinkers to lead conversations on topics related to 20th century American art. Past Barnet scholars have included Glenn Adamson, Renee Ader, David Driscoll, Jackie Francis, and Jamie Powell, among many others. We're incredibly grateful for this ongoing support and for the opportunity to welcome another leading voice in our field tonight, Teresa Baker. Through a mixed media practice that combines both artificial and natural materials, Baker creates abstracted landscapes that explore various topographies and how we move, see, and explore within them. The materials, texture, shape, and color relationships are guided by her heritage as an enrolled member of the three affiliated tribes, while also invoking the forms of Euro-American modernist painting. Her practice is exemplified in Looking Up, currently on view at the PMA on the third floor, in which astroturf is repurposed into undulating forms that echo the land itself. Baker was named a 2025 Guggenheim Fellow and is currently a visiting artist at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. In addition, Teresa is a 2022 Joan Mitchell Fellow and the recipient of the 2020 Native American Fellowship for Visual Arts at the UCross Foundation. She was a Tournesol Artist-in-Residence at the Headland Center for the Arts, as well as an Artist-in-Residence at the Fogo Island Arts in Newfoundland and the MacDowell in New Hampshire. Her work has been on view recently and has been recently acquired by the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Hammer Museum, Yale University Art Gallery, and the Portland Museum of Art. And when you make it to New York, her work is one of the true highlights of this year's Whitney Biennial. Tonight, Teresa will share her practice and then we'll be in conversation with the PMA's Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art, Sayanta Mukhopadhyay. Please join me in again thanking the Barnet Foundation and welcoming Teresa to the stage.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to move this up a little bit. Okay, everyone can hear me in the back? Great. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I'm really thrilled to be here. The work has been here on view since 2022. And I get pictures periodically because it's been it stayed up all that time, and it's a real honor for me as an artist to have the work living and have people see it. So it makes me very happy to be here for the first time. As was mentioned, I'll be at Skowhegan, so this is my first time in Maine. My family and I, we drove out from Montana, where we currently have been living for the last year, and I have 3 toddlers, 4-year-olds, and my twins are 2, so it was pretty crazy. But we're happy to be here. So, I am Mandan and Hidatsa, so I'm from 2 tribes from North Dakota on my father's side, and I am German American on my mother's side. And I talk a lot about in my work how informative my upbringing was. And so my father worked for the National Park Service, so I was raised in North Dakota, Montana, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. This here is a picture of North Dakota, just for anyone kind of unfamiliar with some parts of that landscape. And that upbringing of living in national parks, combined with an understanding and cultural perspective of Mandan and Hidatsa, our religion, the revolves around land, our sacred sites. And so that combination, I realized as I started to make work, early 20s, undergrad, and I was so interested in abstraction and loved abstraction, is I found that was all coming out through the work that I was making. So again, this is a picture of the reservation that I'm from in Fort Berthold. My family, I come from a family of ranchers on my father's side and farmers on my mother's. And so I left Nebraska. I went to a high school in Nebraska, and I left that and went to undergrad in New York City at Fordham University. And that's really where I fell in love with art, and I should say abstraction specifically. And so I want to take you through very briefly, because what I like to do, that we only have about 10, 15 minutes on this. So I want to show you how I got to AstroTurf, which I think is really important to explain. But so just a few examples. I have a long drawing practice here of which I still make them. I have hundreds of these, and it's a really easy way for me to get out composition and color really quickly without it being precious as well. This is all on polyurethane foam, and these are, I generally love working large when I can, so they're like 3 feet by 4 feet, around that size. And so this kind of started me on, this was sort of post kind of traditional painting on canvas, and where I realized what I wanted was actually to get into shape, because that felt really boundaryless. And what also I was interested in was mark making, irregularity, imperfection. And so this was a really important kind of moment taking me further. I left polyurethane foam because it gets really brittle. It's also very toxic. So there was a lot of reasons I had to kind of leave it, even though I loved it as a material. And so I was kind of sort of chasing from this point. This was like 2012, grad school. How to get some aspects of this kind of imperfection, the shape, the scale, combined with my drawing practice. How could I achieve that in a 2D piece? And ideally, what keeps me going to the studio is, how can I achieve the visceral? How can an object have a life to it and not just be static? And so that's my like underlying drive that I love going to the studio for. Fast forward, so I left polyurethane foam, I went on to felt. These materials were hard because I couldn't get that imperfection a little bit, like I really loved the foam. Plastics, plastic for me just had it was just very, very cold. And although even AstroTurf, it is plastic, but it operates a little bit differently. And so I moved post-grad school, post-Headlands residency to Beaumont, Texas, where my husband is from. And I was there for 3 years so he could do some caretaking for his family. And it was there that, I was walking the aisles of Home Depot, and this sort of magic of AstroTurf kind of struck. And that started me down this path. So I took it home, put some yarn down just to shape it out, and it was kind of that instant moment of, oh, this actually is doing all the things I've been searching for. And it was really 10 years to get to this point. I certainly never anticipated AstroTurf being my canvas, but it made the most sense for everything I was doing at that time. Also, this is, 97 by 107 inches, so it's giant. So as a young artist who is moving around, doesn't have a lot of money, like I could also get scale. There was a lot of logistical or practical things this material solved. And so I'm very material driven, I'm very process based. And so these materials are kind of continuously informing what I'm doing and making. And so then this is my first kind of really important show in the Bay Area of AstroTurf and the combination of natural materials as well. And so we had just moved to LA, we left Southeast Texas, and I started making baskets. And part of that was really a lot of kind of what continues I'm seeing to happen for me in this process-based way is that I was thinking a lot about culture, moving. I've moved so much in my life at this point, and as an adult, I continued to move to urban areas. And I was sort of like, I should be closer to family, kind of questioning some of the choices I was making. And so I knew all I could do was kind of ground myself in that place. And so I planted a hidatsa garden with our traditional heirloom seeds, corn, squash, sunflowers, and beans, and then I also started basket making. And so willow is a very common material that we use. The Northern Plains, our baskets are definitely, here in Maine, there's an incredible, obviously very long history of basket making. Ours is very different. And the baskets really served a purpose of function to ceremonial, just depended on the context. But I was sort of learning how to make these willow baskets. And of course, kind of in my style, what happens is the material takes over. And so it became so much more about the material and letting it do what it does. So here we have corn husks here on the AstroTurf from my garden that I had dried. Very interested in the kind of connection and the fragility of artwork as well. And so the fragility of that corn husk that can potentially deteriorate or will over time, combined with this harshness of the turf, it really it did a lot for me that I'm still investigating to this point. So this was early 2017, 2019, moving on to kind of getting into painting. So then I started painting on AstroTurf. I started changing the colors. That's buffalo hide there at the top and the bottom. For many, many years, I had all of these materials from my father. He would send me hides, deer hides, buffalo hides, and he was always saying, use this in your work. And I wanted to, but I hadn't figured out how. And so it was really this kind of era where it all started coming together for me in the practice. This was made in Fogo Island, Newfoundland, which I feel like is actually really kind of close to here in many ways. And it was, it was so wonderful because residencies are really helpful in terms of limitations. And so I feel like I really operate off of limitations. I could only get this long-haired AstroTurf in Canada. But it was great. So then I had to figure out how to work with it, and it did something entirely different. The place of Fogo, I think, is really in these particular works as well. So I'm going to move on a little quicker. This is from the Hammer Museum at Made in LA. It was a significant moment in my practice, and really what happened for this show for me was thinking about how can my work create a space? How can it create a feeling? And so that's when I became a little bit more deliberate in the practice about thinking, what is the feeling I want these particular pieces to convey? And so I was thinking about, of course, LA, but really this big group show and what does this represent? And so what do I want? I was thinking about Northern Plains landscape, quiet, a little bit more meditative, this place of feeling safe and grounded. And so that's how I entered and started this particular work for the Hammer Show. This was my first show in New York City at Broadway Gallery 2 years ago, I think now. just show how the work has kind of evolved. And this is the sort of middle section there is painted with acrylic. It's so hard. I hope you all get a chance, if you haven't, to see the work upstairs, just to see the details. That one in particular has the buckskin on it. And it can be really hard to come through in pictures, but we have willow here, hay bale rope that my dad sent me, yarn, acrylic. And so I'm going to jump to kind of a new shift in the practice, which has been double-sided hanging pieces. I was invited to be part of the Prospect Triennial down in New Orleans last year, 2 years ago, and it was a really exciting moment because I think what's so great about the Triennial is they really want artists to, it's a place of experimentation. And talking with one of the curators, Miranda, she was like, what have you not done yet? And I was like, well, I really been, like, I just, in the back of my mind, had this double-sided hanging piece that I wanted to try to start to kind of intersect space, come off of the wall. And so this is kind of where that was born, was giving that opportunity that I was given from them to do that in this space. And this particular show was about home, and I think a lot about home, which I covered just very, very briefly in terms of landscape, because what I think about with these kind of vast expanses is this attention to detail, this attention to how we roam around and how we're looking and like where we are, where our bodies are placed in this scene, and also like what that does for us. And so when I approached this particular show, it was sort of, this was about home as well, but I was thinking, okay, where is the freedom? You know, home also is a place of like freedom and my drawing practice, and so that's really what these two pieces were about, was really thinking about my drawings and this place of freedom. So, you know, allowing for a little more freedom in the line. For example, I have real limitations with my materials. The yarn can only do so much. I can only like make so many marks with it, and so how do I push those? Like, how can I continue to push it in every single piece and do something I haven't quite done in the piece prior? And so all of my work in particular, generally I do not repeat shapes. It's very rare, and so I like the autonomy that each piece gets, and I like its relation to the last. Let's see. And just kind of show you where the baskets have evolved to this point. So willow on the bottom, astroturf there on the top. Really combination of the basket and the astroturf 2D pieces. That's all buckskin there on the top. Let's see. And I also started bronzing the willow too, which was exciting development because it really retains and holds the essence of the willow so much, and sort of to keep it a little more permanent and be able to put it outside. And then taking on to the Arts and Letters show in New York City, where the double-sided pieces really expanded. They got much bigger. So this is a 12-foot long piece by 11 feet wide. This piece in particular, so I was living in Los Angeles and in Altadena, where the fires were a little over a year ago. And so we saw the fire from our window. We evacuated. We did not lose our home. We are very lucky to have a standing home, but ultimately it made us leave LA for many reasons. But this piece was hanging outside because it's really hard to find space for 12 feet by 11 feet. So I built a structure outside in LA to hang it, and it the fires came and we left, and this is like, you're only thinking about so many things in that moment, and I was like, oh, it must have flown away for sure. I lost that work. And we went back, and my husband had wrapped it around the pole, and it was still there, amazingly, and like even like parts of our backyard had like caught on fire, and it was for the show at Arts and Letters, which I love because there's so much natural light. It's a giant space, and so it became a really significant point because especially for this piece, I can't look at it without kind of seeing its history. Everything I had done to that point, I cleaned it and safely dealt with the work, but I kind of stripped it and started all over. And I was really thinking about, it was so much heavier at that point. And so thinking about its groundedness and heaviness, and then, and sort of going from there. And so every work really comes from an intuitive place, but it is also really inspired kind of about personal life. Whether or not that's in the text, that's kind of like thinking about it as I'm making it. That's kind of what's going into that. And just to end here on a detail, just wanted to kind of point out in terms of thinking about how can I push the limitations of the material is like, for instance, the buckskin in this piece, and looking up upstairs, is, it's coming out so it's more sculptural. So there's all these kind of subtleties that I think about with every single piece in the studio of how can I make this material do something different in a very, very subtle way. And I really enjoy that part of the process so much in the studio. So we're going to continue talking. You want to come on up?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to the Will Barnet Foundation. Thank you to the Barnet family. And thank you, of course, to Teresa. Thank you for joining us. It's so fascinating to hear about your practice. I have not had the pleasure of doing a studio visit with you yet, so to get that kind of overview, it's so enlightening. I wanted to share a small anecdote. I came to the PMA just about 3 years ago, and I remember there was a magazine feature on like the new curator, and they'd asked me what my favorite work in the PMA collection was, and I'd said your work. So it's a really lovely full circle moment 3 years later, of course. There's so much I want to talk about, and I was struck by so much. One thing that I wanted to ask, and this is perhaps maybe a little basic, but we'll start here, is that the green of the AstroTurf reads quite obviously to me as kind of grass or the land writ large. I'm curious about how you choose. You spoke about shape, but how do you choose color for the other kind of layers in your work?
Yeah.
And what do they stand? Do they mean anything, or do they stand for something?
Sure. And I think ultimately color has become this thing of, at this point, of what feeling, what kind of expression do I want this piece to have? We have limited sides, but there's some that are like really bright, poppy, red and pinks, and so it kind of really depends on where the work is being shown, what it's for. At this point, like what I want to continue to build off of and try to develop the work, because I am so process-based. It's almost like we're kind of in this collaboration, the materials and I, and so how can it continue to evolve? And so sometimes it really is about the color, but it's also about, I have like 7 colors of AstroTurf to choose from, so I have that limitation, and then what can I add to it? But I also can't build on a ton of acrylic paint because it would get so bulky and just, I think, really ugly. So it's like, it has to be very like carefully considered, but it really depends on the outside shape. For example, like, if it's a little more round, I find it to be a little bit more kind of inviting or calm, or is it sharp edges? And then, so it's kind of like the shape informs also the color and then the feeling I want to give it, so, yeah.
I'm curious, you still call your works paintings despite them being quite sculptural.
Sort of.
Sort of. Okay, tell me about that. Because I'd heard this myth that Teresa Baker calls her works paintings.
I don't think of them as sculptures.
Okay.
I think I have a painting background, and so they're more in the painting realm. I don't think of them as textiles.
Interesting.
Which I feel like I'm now getting more and more like sort of labeled in the textile, as a textile artist, which is totally fine and wonderful, but I deliberately am not weaving them in, and that was sort of on purpose because I wanted them to function more like a drawing. And so I'm not giving you a straight answer because I think they live kind of in between all of these places, which I think is exciting, and also like something I was trying to figure out, through this kind of process. Yes, so
I think a lot about the intimacy of medium and how we have a very kind of siloed understandings of like what painting is or what, but I think so many artists today are really kind of questioning that inherently in their work. And I know that, you know, you mentioned the double-sided work. I think in the past, there was this encounter that was frontal with your work, and now it's immersive. Like the work at the Whitney, we were just talking about it upstairs, it almost feels like an installation project. And I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about that evolution? You talked about the double-sided, but the one at the Whitney is kind of like at a slant, it's at an angle. It really feels like you can kind of like live around it. What was the impulse for that?
yeah, so that was made sort of in this year post Altadena fires, where my family and I, we moved 5 different times in that year with 3 kids. And so it was a really kind of hectic year, but I of course had to also make work for the Whitney. So we had moved to Montana at that point temporarily, and that work was so, I feel like it feels like Montana to me, and it feels like this moment because it's even like the gradients of the really kind of bright blue side. It's so much in response to landscape, and I'm like, I talk about landscape, but it's always kind of at this point sort of from a memory perspective because I've been living in cities, and so now I'm having this opportunity to really look at color, really, you know, look at the sun, and the in Montana it's just incredible, and so I'm seeing that come into the work, and that's really in that double-sided piece. And then the other side was made in this barn in the winter with no heat, which was very cold. And it's incredibly windy where I live in Livingston, Montana. And so it was just like, it was like this incredible sound of the wind hitting this tin barn. And so the other side, it does look very windy to me. And so it's almost like these kind of natural elements are also informing the mark making, essentially. So the other side is kind of these really loose threads that are just kind of allowed to be, you know, what they want to be in a sense. And so that kind of push and pull of like pushing material or not, and giving it that mark making aspect. But also like, I know, I'm just kind of going back to the question too of what is this, a painting or a sculpture, and I think, you know, some of that drive to kind of find this place where it's not quite this or not quite that, which is also, you know, an interest in abstraction and interest in the like autonomy of the shape of the ultimate piece, is like you can't quite place it, and so can it like do something new? And then thinking in terms of my background, I come from, you know, German farmer lineage where everyone was embroidering and quilting, and they're incredibly beautiful, and I love them so much. And then, I mean those you know, all of this material and this craft and work that my family was doing. And then on the other side, we were beading, and we had regalia, and we also used material and thought about material really strong. You know, there was kind of a reverence in a certain way, and it depends on like where it was taken. And so I think that's kind of informed my material practice. I mean, some of my favorite parts of my like handmade quilts from my grandma are when lines are irregular, because that's when I can see her. And so kind of thinking about where is perfection and where is that expectation of perfection. And so.
It feels like a really embodied kind of relationship to material also in the way that you approach it. We're talking about landscapes, and I had the pleasure of walking you through the galleries earlier, and I'm thinking about the landscape genre and the way that we typically frame it in art historical discourse as something representational, as something kind of bucolic or pastoral. I'm curious about your relationship to that term, landscape, and how your work, which is obviously engaging with it and kind of pushing back at it, what's your relationship to that history? I know that you're, you know, you've inherited so much of that language of abstraction from multiple places, but what about that representational kind of landscape genre? Is that something you think about?
No, I really think about landscape more from a cultural lens. Really, I know there's a whole, of course, art history of landscape genre, but I think my approach is more thinking about it from, in terms of it being alive and something that has to be protected, but also really is so important in humanity, right? And so, like, I don't know, just, I mean, I think of it in terms of spiritual sites. I mean, for me, it's comes from a spiritual lens, and so that's really my approach for that. So, yeah.
And it's interesting because also maybe twinned with that is maybe the cartographic elements of your work, that there's a kind of map making that's taking place, and maps have been a tool of control, I think, in the past, kind of these explorations that then claim. I'm curious about, map making and what that's like for you. Is that something you're thinking about? Sounds like there's an affective element also.
Yeah,
emotional.
I think of it's yes, but I think about it too in terms of like erasing maps.
Yes.
Honestly,
Yes.
You know, I had a real privilege of growing up in places where I didn't always see boundaries. Of course, there's fences and all this stuff, but like it really continued on, and so. Often I also think in a lot of family conversations, you know, there was a lot of talk of, you know, how has this land been used traditionally by whatever tribe we may be living by, because we moved quite a bit, so we weren't always in our homelands. And so it was very normal to have those discussions, and it was very normal to kind of think about it. And so sometimes I'll even get to places and I kind of just erase like what I'm seeing a little bit, because I want to like get the full understanding of this land and how it operates, and you know, the animals and the rivers. And so I just kind of, that's kind of what I visually do. And so when I think when I'm making that work, it's just kind of automatically like erased. And I think you know, the shape, even for the eye, having shape pieces, it kind of allows the eye to move on and off, which is very different from a square and rectangle where you feel, at least I feel like a little bit stuck. And so I like that kind of movement on and off of the piece. So
I love the way that your work, the way it lives on our third floor, because it, in very close proximity to these kind of bound rectangular paintings, and then you turn the corner and yours has kind of freed itself from those borders, which is really poetic. And then your work lives right at that intersection between the conversation surrounding modernism in the earlier 20th century and into the 21st. So it's really this wonderful kind of inflection point in the galleries upstairs. I wanted to ask you, since I've never been to your studio, what does a day in the studio look like for you?
So it's a little, I don't know what the word would be. I don't have like full 8 hours anymore, just life with small children. And so it can be a little bit more like, you know, an hour here, an hour there, but I try to get condensed. I'm not good at like, I like breaks from my studio, I should say that. Like I like to go in and do like a lot of work at once, and then I like to take a step back. I like a break from seeing the work a lot, and so I will also work on 3 to 4 pieces at once, kind of going back and forth between them. You know, my mark making can be very minimal, but it's like intentional that there's a lot of time in between that mark. So that mark has to be kind of really, I have to be very certain and confident about like, what is this shape? What is this mark going to be? And so I take a lot of time in that way, in terms of like making the work. So, but I don't listen to music, you know, like I just.
That's my next question.
Yeah. I find it to be very distracting. Yeah. You know, I like to be like as kind of present as possible. And if I get stuck, a very good friend of mine who's also an artist, we talk a lot about how we love sweeping our studio floors. It's like very meditative, and you kind of like take a break, but you're still there and kind of can see the work. And also taking walks too when I kind of feel stuck, just leaving the space is really helpful. So,
I feel that too with my work. Sometimes you have to walk away from it to be able to come back to it with a fresh eye.
Yeah.
We've talked a bit about inheritances and lineages, and I'm curious, while you were young, coming up as an artist, what were you looking at? Who were your favorite artists to kind of study? What books are on your bookshelf right now?
Yeah, I actually, Richard Tuttle was huge influence early on. I moved to New York City from Nebraska. I honestly had no idea I was going to be an artist either. I really didn't know what I was doing. And I come from a very particular sort of upbringing in terms of what art is, because we have cultural art, but that it's generally kind of also coincides with spiritual as well. And so, every tribe is different, and I think a lot of Southwestern tribes kind of approach this in a different way. But for me, to sort of make traditional work, it operates and functions very differently. And so I think moving to New York City, kind of getting an introduction really to kind of Western art history was kind of mind-blowing. And seeing Richard Tuttle's work, seeing this material, that's also, there's a humor to it. And I connected with it right away. And I was like, I understand this language. And so that kind of set me on the trajectory of abstraction.
And do you have...
and Eva Hesse, and
yes, of course,
just all these,
And we talked a little bit about your love of Kamruza Ram, our shared love of Kamruza Ram. Are there peers that you're also careers that you're kind of following, that you're excited by?
Yeah, Martha Tuttle, actually, funny enough, I've become friends with Richard Tuttle's daughter recently, because she's also a resident of Montana. I just really love her work and how she's thinking. Ishi Glinsky, a really good friend I got to know in LA. Safe Azuz. I'm also very excited by a lot of what Native artists are doing right now. I think there's this hasn't been in the conversation for long enough, and so the fact that these are artists that are making and talking about culture and art and doing really exciting things, and to feel I feel a lot of excitement by that.
Yeah.
So,
I had a potentially thorny question, but I was curious about your relationship to the idea of the museum, which has so long been, again, a kind of force of control or extraction, and so many, now your work kind of lives in these institutions. Do you have a thought about, is it something that crosses your mind? Do you think about that? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's hard. I used to go on these trips with my father when I was, high school, college age. So they would bring him around to various museums to look at their collection of particularly Mandan Hidatsa, our tribal objects. And so, that always makes me sad, to be honest with you. I get really sad. I was just at PAFA. I was doing a papermaking residency with the Brodsky Center, which is, I love papermaking. Anyway, different conversation. But, and they brought out these ledger drawings for me to see that was in their collection from the 1800s, and I'm so happy to see them. But, these are predominantly males who they brought out to Pennsylvania, 18 years old, and had them make these ledger drawings, for their catalog that they're going to give their subscribers, because they're going to, educate these young, Native men to, become civilized. And so it's heartbreaking. It's I looked at them because I wanted to connect with those artists, but also it broke my heart. And so so we have these objects that are living, you know, these tribal objects that are living in museums, and that's hard for me. I don't think they should be there at all. I do think abstraction in my work operates differently, I will say, because I'm not making this under a ceremonial context, and so it's, for me, it's operating from a different place, and so at the same time, from that point of view, from like an art object, I think I'm like so grateful that people get to view it. I'm so grateful it has a home where it's protected, and so it becomes complicated in that way. Yeah.
I certainly feel that coming from South Asia, where it's actually one of the first testing grounds of the museum for a colonial government. And what ended up happening was so many archaeological kind of objects were taken from where they were in situ and removed and housed in buildings, which was really, again, a kind of form of control. It stopped people from being able to access their own heritage. And that is in the DNA of museums, and it's something I think that, you know, we as curators have to reckon with every single day, and kind of think about that is really how this kind of came to be. The same moment that like zoos came about, because people were like bringing animals over from. So it's just a part of our inheritance that I think that we just need to contend with. On a lighter note, I knew I was going to ask you this, and I wanted to make sure I got the chance. But I always like to ask artists about more popular cultural forms that they imbibe. So what movies are you watching? What TV shows are you watching? What are you listening to? Because I feel like it gives us an insight into your work too.
So I love rom-coms, like B-level rom-coms are like my favorite. Thank you. Just like turn off the brain, very like happy, and you know, it's always a happy ending, so that's great. Love romance, so very exciting. I mean, I think my work is romantic, to be honest with you. You know, like it's I don't know, it's romantic for like material and landscape and anyway.
And it's the sublime also.
It's
sometimes.
a sublime.
It's like you're dealing with such expansive spaces that you're like harnessing through your brain. That's romantic. Yeah.
But I don't have any like brilliant. I really don't watch like really good movies. I don't.
Yeah.
It drives my husband crazy, but
they're usually overhyped.
My favorite movie, it's been a while, it's like Legends of the Fall from like 90s, Montana, Brad Pitt, and now I'm like living in Montana again. It's very exciting. But music, I really, my husband, I don't listen to a lot of music. So I don't have great things on that. I like old country. I grew up on like old country, and so that's like very familiar and good. On Spotify, I'll turn on like spa music as a category, just to like spa music. Yeah, you just type that in. It's just like very relaxing.
I love that.
But that's my. I mean, I'll watch like White Lotus and Beef and stuff. You know, like I'll do that.
Because you have to know what people are talking about.
Exactly.
That was my experience living in LA. Is that if you didn't watch the TV, you couldn't keep up with people in conversation. So, one of maybe on a kind of ending note, I wanted to ask you about your hopes and dreams for this summer at Skowhegan and your time in Maine. We're so happy to have you here in the state for the first time. And Skowhegan, it's interesting. I've been on the stage with a lot of artists recently, and the commonality is that their time at Skowhegan. I'm just curious to know what your expectations are for this summer. You just got here a few days ago.
I did. I think my one expectation is inspiration. I hope to leave inspired, and I think I will. I'm such a studio artist, and I don't teach. I'm alone all the time, so I'm excited to talk about art. I'm excited to talk about ideas, and so I'm sure I will leave inspired. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We there's a lot of talk about art here, and there's an incredibly robust community. That's my experience. I hope that you get to go out and enjoy Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming out.
We
Thank
will
you.
stick around on stage for a little bit if people want to come up and say hi, ask a couple of questions. But thank you again, and good night.